So I'm Stephanie Fanjul, President of the North Carolina Partnership for Children. I want to welcome you to our session here. I am very excited about what the folks that have given of their time to visit with us, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we're going to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to let folks, each one of the panelists, speak for about 10 minutes. Kevin, that was 10.
That's going to kill me.
I knew it. 10 minutes each, and then what we'll do is have an opportunity to have a little bit of a conversation. And while I have, lots of questions, many of which have come from you all, I do want us to have time for you all to bring questions to these folks. It is an extraordinary group of business leaders, and I know that certainly in North Carolina, as well as in other states that are working in the area of early ed, that it is critical that we engage partners all across our community and hear folks willing to talk to us about how to do that in their particular, if you will, affinity group. So we have Kevin Carnes, Philip Peterson, and Kim Jasmin. And Philip's first, right? Philip's up first. So Philip Peterson is a partner at Aon Hewitt, specializing in global retirement strategies, stock option valuation, and human capital metrics development. I do need to know more about that someday in my life. No, okay. Phil joined Aon in 1987 and has more than 30 years of employee benefit consulting experience. He formerly managed the retirement practice in Philadelphia, managed the Philadelphia office, and chaired the National Defined Benefit Practice Council, and he now leads Aon's national, state, and local government consulting practice. But Phil helped co-create with Child Care Matters the Aon United Way of Southeastern Pennsylvania Hand in Hand Award for quality child care in the business community. He's also testified before the House Education Committee of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives on the importance of child care to the business community. He has served on the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia and on the state board of the Pennsylvania Economy League. And he is the co-chair of Pennsylvania's Early Learning Investment Commission and the co-chair of the advisory board of ReadyNation. We are delighted to have him with us and share his perspective and his knowledge, particularly around how we can build a bridge to the community of business leaders. Phil.
Well, thanks, Stephanie. That sounds a lot more impressive hearing it when you're sitting down than reading it yourself or writing it, So hopefully I won't add the need for Tylenol to your Advil. So I cut back my 60-page PowerPoint, because I am a business guy, right, to about 4 pages, just so you have something to take away with you, because I understand that these will be posted. So I wanted to take a few minutes before my time is allotted and I get the gaff hook to talk a little bit about what it is that drives business people to want to engage in the early childhood space, as we call it. And of course, you folks are involved in early childhood programs, policy formation, advocacy from a lot of different angles. A lot of people who are not familiar with the space think that early childhood is, essentially early childhood education. Okay, and that's if they're aware. Okay, so what we need to do is first broaden the audience's appreciation of what early childhood is all about, and that it's really a continuum of things that impact a young child's life and their family's life as well. So the first thing that the business folks really need to know when you try to get them involved is they want an agenda. Business people love agendas. They want to see what it is that the purpose of you talking to them, what's to be accomplished, and how are we going to look at the outcomes. And that creates the value proposition as to why I should get involved in this. Something in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, which was critical, was to have existing champions in place. I wasn't the first guy in Pennsylvania to say we need to start a much more robust set of programs and advocacy on behalf of young children. Our foundations in Pennsylvania were in place with respect to early childhood for 30 years at this point or more. And then we had a rather large organization, a banking organization, and I'm sure you're all aware, PNC was a lead corporate champion with their Grow Up Great program in Pennsylvania. And then there were a series of other champions that came along. I guess I was probably a local southeastern Pennsylvania Philly born and bred champion. And there were people like me throughout the state. And then there was an organization called OCDEL, the Office of Child Development and Early Learning, which was a collaboration between public welfare and education and the state. So there was a government aspect to this too. So there were a lot of different stars aligning, and I know in a lot of your states and a lot of your communities you're not that fortunate to have all of these stars aligning, so you need to start just one place. And business people who see that this is now, okay, maybe not 5, 10, especially not 15 years ago, but now has got some incredible momentum all the way up to the president's proposed budget. Now it's not that much of a mystery. People are reading about it. It's not like they'd scratch their head when you went to them and asked them to get involved in this space with you. So another issue, though, is coordinated outreach. If business people have a lot of different people coming to them, they're going to wonder, well, how are you folks working together? If we've got a bunch of different vectors going in different ways, how are you really creating a comprehensive, well-directed, homogeneous agenda to make young kids' lives better? So that's critical to the extent, and I know we have a lot of advocacy organizations in the community, but somehow we need to come together in order to tell a single story and to show business people who otherwise would be very interested in the space how you're coordinating your activities and your strategies. Solutions, not just problem statements. That's what business people are all about, right? They see a problem, they jump right to the solution, maybe sometimes too quickly. Quality programs, strong evidence is important. Policy relevant outcomes, measured, reviewed, programs that are improved over time. They want to have, you want to have a spiel, an elevator, pitch, if you will, about those kinds of things. Those are all important aspects to the business community. And then finally, as I said before, results that are going to have consequences so that they will see meaningful change through their involvement in the early childhood space. So when you get together with business leaders in a forum or even individually, you want to know exactly, you want to know exactly what it is that you're looking for before you engage them. And usually it's going to be, they'll be very patient as far as an education, but they're going to want to get to the ask. And you're going to want to keep the ask fairly narrow, all right, fairly directed, all right. So maybe you just want them to get involved in a single part of your agenda, which is going to be, normally pretty broad, right? So they don't want to be a rubber stamp on something. They don't want to put their signature on a letter and then just disappear. But they also don't want to know everything you know, all right? They're not into that. Don't give them a 40-page article to read. Most of our business folks have not read the materials from ReadyNation on the back of the table there, okay? I have, but I'm a weirdo, okay? So I love this stuff, but a lot of folks have not read anything like what's on the back of that table. And that stuff is, that stuff is cooked up for a lay audience, a lot of it. I mean, it's very readable, all that stuff. So you want to share your evidence-based outcomes. So you want to talk about what you've done and what impacts it's had. You want to meet them where they live, so if they're not comfortable doing something, or you already know what their agenda is, maybe you know how they're connecting in the community, okay, with respect to civic or their avocational interests. Try to connect with them on some basis in that regard. And you want to know what's in it for them, okay? It's good to hear messages from a lot of groups, local leaders. They want to make sure there's other people behind them and at their shoulders, so that they're not standing there alone. And you know, because you know, a lot of folks in the business community are not going to be extreme risk takers. They're not going to necessarily. There are a few of us, but there are a lot of them that don't want to necessarily be that sole voice in the wilderness. Don't mix fundraising with advocacy. If you want them to do something, ask them to do something. If you want money from them, figure out how to do it with some other group, or figure out how to do it in another venue. Don't talk to them about the two in the same conversation. And then, you know, no surprises. I mean, that's obvious. This is if you look on the left, a lot of these folks don't know how to connect the dots. So what you want to do is, starting from either from the top, okay, which is where their concerns are, in creating a vibrant, robust workforce, and maintaining the continuity, the viable continuity of their businesses. You know, it's all about employing tax-paying citizens that are critical to a vital economy. And they go, okay, what does early childhood have to do with this? Well, you just work your way down, okay? And they're smart folks. They're going to understand it, but they may not connect the dots without you literally laying it out for them. When you get down to taking action, these are some of the things that we do in Pennsylvania, and these are some of the things that that Josh and Sarah and Rob Duggar and I do at ReadyNation. You got to meet with legislators. You got to meet with policymakers. And business people are more effective at that than anybody else. Remember, there are a lot of votes there. There's a lot of tax money, corporate and otherwise. So legislators, not to belittle who else they might listen to or not listen to, they listen to business people. Speak to business and service groups. Business folks will very often be willing to send the message that they already know or that they're comfortable with to other groups. Have them educate their own employees. That's a simple one. Have them invite colleagues to meetings of other business people around early childhood. Writing op-eds, doing radio shows. A lot of us do that if we're comfortable. And I think the most awesome thing to do, or as a little kid I know would say, the awesomest thing to do, would be to visit high-quality early childhood programs. You know, this is a pursuit of the heart for me. Sometimes it takes a real hands-on experience for a lot of business people to make it a pursuit of the heart for them. And sometimes that can kind of take them over the edge. But it also impresses them when they visit a really high-quality early childhood program. Here are some of the things that we've been doing at ReadyNation. We work on a lot of different fronts, and you can talk to myself, or you can talk to Josh afterwards if you want to know exactly what we're doing in what states. We're touching a lot of states. Our purpose is to go in and to build homegrown business coalitions, for lack of a better term, business groups, roundtables, committees, commissions in each state. And that those business groups are operating within the confines of the culture in that state, the political atmosphere, the way business likes to operate, based on funding or the lack thereof that is available. So we tailor our approach at ReadyNation to exactly what's going on in the business community and what we feel the business community can bear, and what they will be open to entertaining in each state. So we don't cookie cut across each state. So I think I'm probably beyond my 10 minutes. But
13. Good job. Thank you. All right. Nice job. Thank you, Phil, and thanks for being so close to time. I do love, we've been talking a little bit through the last couple of days about making the connection between heart and head. And Phil just talked about the pursuit of his heart, which he was able to see when he went to see childcare programs. So I think that's a nice thread that we've been talking about through the last couple of days.
Of our clients is sort of critical to the measure of success that we have as a company. So the same holds true when we measure the impact of our philanthropic investments, which is really focused on catalyzing meaningful change in high-need communities. But we get there because we believe that a critical component of a healthy community is the extent to which families can rely on quality public education systems, a solid infrastructure of affordable housing, a network of high-quality social services, and a strong economic base so that families have a chance to improve the life outcomes for their children. At the very beginning of a family's journey is the need to access high-quality early care and education options. There's a rich body of evidence that you all know that shows the correlation between high-quality early learning and better life outcomes. But we also know that despite socioeconomic status, if children are engaged in effective pre-K learning environments, they will be on a path of readiness for kindergarten. So why is this important to us? It's proven that investing in quality early childhood education with a birth to 8 framework is a strong predictor of academic success, high school graduation, and the likelihood of attending college, of course, all that you know. No, I don't have the papers made it come back on. It timed out and I moved the paper, it came back on. So anyway, again, all the stuff you know about what the data says. But we also know that healthy development, according to the work that the Center for Developing Child at Harvard did, is in the early years really provides the building blocks for educational achievement, economic productivity, responsible citizenship, lifelong health, strong communities, and successful parenting of the next generation. So why is this important to us? Well, at JPMorgan Chase, and frankly most financial services companies, we get that human capital is really our only competitive advantage. Having an educated citizenry is critical to the success of our business, the base of customers that we have, the employees that we want to hire, and the citizens that we want to engage in the success of our business. We know that there are a host of successful models, but the reason that we're here today is that we understand the complexity and the challenges that include lack of availability, affordability, disconnected services, and systems that too often fail the best interest of children and families. So you all know, and you've heard it already, that we need to have a coherent continuum of care that has a quality rating system, offers both access and affordability in all communities, and aligns content and practice that includes effective programs, professional staff, and effective transition to the K-12 system to achieve the highest outcomes. The President is all over this. The National Governors Association is all over this. The governor in our state is all over this, in many of your states. And we may not all agree in the ways in which we want to reach these goals, but we do agree that it is critical that we need to align these practices and ensure that we connect early childhood education and K-12 policies so that they better serve all children starting at birth. But this forum is about business engagement, and this too is a sector that needs to show up meaningfully and participate in strengthening the early learning system. We, the collective we, must find a way to level the playing field for 3-year-olds and close the readiness and achievement gaps between low-income communities and communities with greater resources. And we cannot ignore the impact of poverty and how it contributes and complicates designing a system that can respond to the diverse needs of its citizens. So what does all this have to do with engaging the business community? Well, at the end of the day, we need to determine how to engage the business community in ways that speaks their language, that engages their interests, that somehow helps them appreciate the investment in the early years as not needing to demonstrate a quick return on investment because it's not going to happen overnight, but that there's a marathon that we're running, and that marathon will increase the value of all companies to be able to have the productive citizenry, not have the achievement gaps, and quite frankly, affect the competitiveness of what we offer across all sectors. So I appreciate what was said a bit ago in terms of how do we engage the business community. I think the very first and important thing when you want to engage the business is to learn to speak their language, not yours. In my education and early childhood education and early learning systems, I didn't understand what y'all were talking about most of the time. I mean, and we all have an acronym and a language in our companies, but I mean, it was the child welfare system, it was ACS, it was early learning, it was, everybody's got a forum and a committee, and it was not integrated. And I didn't understand who owned what part of this 0 to 5 space. So helping the business community understand that, I think, is really critical. But as important is not expecting that they're A, going to get it, and B, champion it, because the pursuit of the heart is important, but everybody's not going to get there. We have to find a way to meet them around their interests. Is there a champion in your state and in your community that, regardless of what their business role is going to be willing to give voice to this issue, whether they're funding it or not, whether their CEO is on board or not, but has the influence amongst others to gain the interest and championship? How do we address and help influence advocacy? How do you get employees in companies fired up about these issues so that they become the voice of business and ultimately can help bring voice and life to these issues? And then I think finally, we have, in my humble opinion, enough evidence as to why this is important. When we did the forum and launched the unfinished business work that the Committee on Economic Development produced about a year ago, it once again provides the compelling evidence as to why this is important. But the fact of the matter is it's unfinished business, and we have to find a way to finish it. We have to find a way to figure out how to fund it. We have to find a way to get the business community at the table to help figure that out. The business community may not necessarily pay for it, but they're structuring major deals all over the world. Why aren't we asking them how to help structure the deals to pay for this? We have to meet them where they are, leverage the expertise that business brings, and deal with this issue of unfinished business. Because if we don't, then it won't be about those kids. We have to figure out a way to think about this as all kids, and all those kids belong to us. And I am committed in the role and the influence, however little it is, or however some people might think it's big, is to be able to bring these issues to light and to get the people in my organization to appreciate how we might invest and support the issues of building a strong early learning system in this country. And I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. None of these three folks were in our early morning session this morning. For those of you who are in this session this morning, we were so far down in the weeds that we were talking an entirely different language. So I think your point is well made, and we'll talk some more about that as we move forward. So one of the great things about this session is that our presenters were more than willing to have a conversation with us and to take sections of the engaging business leaders, to take different parts, so they weren't all talking about the same thing. So that's why Phil talked mostly about big policy stuff. stuff. And you can hear that Kim talked a lot about the engagement relative to philanthropy. And then we're delighted that Kevin Carnes is with us, and he's going to talk a little bit about running family-friendly businesses. So actually sort of putting on the ground in your business the kinds of values that we all think are important to produce good outcomes for the economy and our children. So Kevin Carnes is the president of Lakeshore Learning Materials. He's been with Lakeshore for over 30 years, beginning in Northern California when Lakeshore was a small California-based company. Kevin's been actively involved in helping Lakeshore expand nationwide and in promoting Lakeshore's unique brand to the educators around the world. From what was once a small regional school supply company, Lakeshore now has 50 stores, 45 sales reps, and 2,000 employees nationwide. And Lakeshore can boast that they are now the largest retail operation in the educational materials and school supply business. And I want to share with you that we want to congratulate Lakeshore because they just recently won the 2013 National Arbor Day Award in recognition of the company's dedication to connecting children with nature and inspiring educators across the country to do the same. And so now, Kevin Carnes.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's always great to be third. I'm the cleanup hitter in a baseball game. Late afternoon, both Phil and Kim were eloquent and said everything that I was going to say. So I'll have a very challenging time here, but it's great to be here. I'm really honored. It's great to be with Stephanie, who I've known for many years. Before email, I think we first communicated with slate tablets when I first knew Stephanie and her advocacy. It's probably true. But again, I come from, I give you a very short little history. I get what you do in many different respects. I was raised in Northern California, up above San Francisco, and there were 5 of us, 5 little Irish Catholic kids, and we didn't have a lot of money. And my mom got a job in the 60s, so she could afford tuition to send us to Catholic school. And so she became a teacher's aide at a new program called Head Start. So my mom worked in the basement of the First Baptist Church 2 blocks away from our house while we all put our Catholic school uniforms on and marched off to Catholic school. Of course, my mother made sure that we all checked in the basement of the First Baptist Church every day at the Head Start Center just to make sure we were being good and doing well. And on the way home, which was the big rumor in town, was the little Carnes Catholics are going in the basement of the First Baptist Church after school, and we were switching teams. But the thing there, though, was I got a chance to see very early on there were a lot of kids that weren't as lucky as we were, and we thought we weren't very lucky. We didn't have a car. We didn't go on vacations. My mom beat into us, hey, look, there's a lot of kids out here, and I'm really exposed to these kids. And she went on to get her teaching credential, became a Head Start teacher, and retired after 25 years. So I had that background. I graduated from college, didn't know what I was going to do, joined VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, and was sent to Omaha, Nebraska for a California boy who had never left California. That was like, you're being assigned to Mars. So what was I assigned to? I was assigned to a Head Start program. So Head Start was not out of my life yet. I thought I was all done. I was involved with the parent involvement coordinator, and then my eyes really opened up, because then I got to go into the homes of kids that you serve every day, and I saw where they came from. And I saw what the environment was like. And that's when I really got it. That's when I really got it. Came back to California, got a job with a new company called Lakeshore, and I'm still doing it. So it's really pretty intriguing. So I have to tell that little story because I really get what you do every day. I know the challenges that you go through every day. So again, I think twisting back into the business aspect, we have grown remarkably since I started with the company. As Stephanie mentioned, we have over 2,000 employees now, and there were only about 20 when I started. But I've seen a huge change. I've seen a huge change in the business community. The biggest thing that business communities don't get about early childhood, there's several, and they're good people, but they don't get the fact, they think that early childhood is crayons and nap time. They think, and that's our job, and I say our job to let them know that. And I say our job because when I got to Lakeshore, we remodeled our building 20 years ago. And I had been involved actually with Stephanie years ago in a group which was involved in consulting to companies that want to do work-life benefits packages, including child development and child care services and things along those lines. And that opened my eyes as well. So 20 years ago, we opened an on-site child development center for our employees' kids called Kids and Companies. And it's a really cool place. It's right in our office. It's not down the street. It's not 2 miles away. The kids are in the first floor of our office, and they're an integral part of our building. And we have seen what a huge difference that makes in the quality of life, not only for the kids we serve, but for the parents. We have now graduated over 1,000 kids from our program, and we're really proud of that. And not just because we're good guys, because of course we are, but the reason is because it is essential to attract good quality employees. It just is. One of the first things we do when people come into our building to interview, and as we've grown, we've had to bring in more people into the company up on a higher level. The first thing we do is take them through Kids and Company. That's the first thing we do, whether they have kids or not. We want them to see that kids are important to us on a variety of different levels. So that's huge. And so I like to translate that. And how do you address the business community? How do you address the business community? I'm so glad that Phil and Kim both mentioned the fact that you folks often speak in Latin. You're speaking Latin to English speakers, the business community. The business community speaks in English. And I think that's really key here. But one of the most successful programs we ever did was our recent transformation, and this was really pretty interesting, our recent transformation of our outside playground to an Arbor Day outdoor classroom. We felt that was really important to get kids actively engaged in nature. But we didn't want this to be one of those things the company comes in with bulldozers and we change everything and all of a sudden we have Disneyland. We really wanted to get the community involved in addition to our employees. So we approached Home Depot. We approached local nurseries. We approached local contractors. We really wanted this to be a grassroots effort. And so suddenly we're having these people come in and seeing what a quality child development center was like. And that made all the difference. We had more volunteers and more help than we could possibly have. One of the most successful center operators that I know, I've known her for a long time, she said, the first thing you need to do, Kevin, is join the Chamber of Commerce. You are business. I think we think of ourselves as services sometimes in the early childhood field. We are providing a service. You're providing an essential business service. You really are. And sometimes the business community doesn't quite get that. And that's your job to let them know how essential their business is and what you do for these companies. Because a lot of them are good people wanting to do good things. They just are, but they just don't get it sometimes. There are certainly exceptions to that. Companies are starting to wake up to the fact. I know Phil mentioned PNC Bank, which is doing a tremendous job actively getting engaged and spreading the word and doing not just writing checks, but actually getting engaged. And there's a lot of people that want to do that. The most successful thing this woman told me to do is, you know what you need to do, Kevin? There's such a thing called chamber mixers. And for new chamber members, they come into their companies and they see what their business is like and they talk and they interact. We do chamber mixers. We have all these insurance companies and other companies in our community come in every 3 months to our center. And they hear and see what we do every day. And they hear about brain development and the importance of it. And they also hear, and I think this is a really hugely important thing, so you can inform the business community, is that the value of subsidized child care. Because many of these businesses could not operate. They could not operate without subsidized child care of one form or another. And they don't realize that. And that's not an evil thing on their part at all. It's just knowledge. It's just knowledge. Whether it's subsidized care here, it's subsidized funding for this. Many of these companies, particularly the companies that are paying on the lower end of the spectrum, that are paying the $8, $9, $10 an hour jobs, could not have staff, could not have qualified staff if it wasn't for Head Start programs and other subsidized child care. And a lot of people don't know about that. They don't really realize that. And that's your job as well, I think, to get the word out on that. Also, another thing I think with community, with businesses, and again, the idea of speaking business, not early childhood, is hugely important to a business. It's not just about writing checks. Companies want to do good things. Companies want to do good things. The Home Depot folks, when we asked them if they would help us with some of the materials for our outdoor classroom, said, can we send in a team of some of our volunteer people? They'd like to do volunteer work in the community. So they weren't writing checks, but they were bringing in people. I know PNC does that. PNC has work days, and they bring their people in. So again, you're bringing the program to the businesses, and again, that's huge. And also use social media. Social media is really important. It really, really is important. It's a broader thing. Use Facebook. Use Facebook. You should all have a Facebook site. You should have your parents like you, hopefully. That's huge. It really is. And you should all have a website, even if it's rudimentary. And you should have your website and your Facebook page and all that on any promotional materials that you do. And when you approach companies, you let them know, check our website out. Check our website out, check our Facebook page out, and you can continually dialogue with them. That's really, really important. I have a daughter that works for Facebook, so she keeps me relevant, which is really pretty handy. But there are good people doing good things out there. Chevron just donated $10 million in California for STEM materials in the K-6 market. They want to do good things, but they need to be directed. They need to be told. But again, in the early childhood community, everything starts K-12. I think a lot of companies just sort of skip over that early childhood world, but that's where the brain development is happening, and I'm speaking to the choir now. But I think that really needs to be told, and we do that whenever we can. Whenever we can, we bring in companies, outside companies, and have them tour our center. Because we were in an industrial area, and it's amazing how many people have their eyes open up with that. So, again, make it easy for these folks, as both Phil and Kim had mentioned. Give them lots of opportunities. You should have a business advisory council if you have a large organization, where you have business folks come in. Some of your parents may be business people as well in many cases. How can they become engaged and talk to their companies? So there's lots and lots of opportunities for you to publicize the work that you're doing. Everybody hears about healthy eating. Everybody hears about healthy eating, but when they come into a child care center and see that you're growing carrots and you're growing vegetables and you're talking to kids about healthy eating, all of a sudden the lights come on. All of a sudden the lights come on. So you're doing tremendous things. And I think because we live in an insular community in the early childhood world sometimes, we need to get out there and tell people that story. If you have an articulate person that can speak to the subject, you should go to Kiwanis Club. Say, hey, I'd like to come in and talk about the early childhood community in my town. And go to the Rotary Club. These are all active service organizations and many, many business people that want to do something. But talk business to them. Talk end result. Talk the next generation of employees. Don't talk Piaget. Don't talk Piaget. That's how we're going to break the walls down. So, I'm almost at 10 minutes. I know she's going to give me a cattle prod here in a moment. But with the rest of the group, I'd love to answer questions. But hopefully I sparked a little curiosity anyway. So, let's keep talking.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, all three of you. I love these. I think they've answered a bunch of the questions that we wanted to be sure to get out there, and I think that what they've given you is different perspectives on what it looks like when you're in the business community as opposed to in the early education community or the nonprofit sector. You know, I have some interesting. I have some questions about the language, and I would really, I mean, Kevin's given us one example. You know, when you're in your own affinity group, you don't even know what words you're using. And I would guess that it's unusual for most of, it's certainly North Carolina. I don't think they're talking about Piaget, Kev. They're talking about, you know, it's the alphabet soup. So the subsidy that comes from DSS and Mort 4 and pre-K, subsidized by the portion of the private funding that then comes through the match money that has to be through. So I would love you all to talk about, and I hope we will take this with good humor, give us some examples of the language we're speaking that makes no sense to you. We'd love to know.
That I still am hoping to figure out is what is the distinction between early care and pre-K and Head Start and, you know, informal versus formal and daycare versus home care providers. So it's a language about the range of both the age group of children and how they're served, what's viewed as important in them being served, and who owns the service, who's responsible, who's accountable. The other thing that I think is really important and is not necessarily a language that is presented to the business community is what is it you want them to do? What is the call to action? That's what we're struggling with in New York City. Betty Holcomb is in the front and is my partner in crime. And when we think about bringing this huge business community in New York City together, we can do that. I can bring them there, but what are we going to ask them to do? And I think that that is also a clarity element that needs to also be coupled with the language piece.
Phil, what words do we use?
You know, it's interesting. I just received a letter, as did some of my fellow Early Learning Investment Commission members in Pennsylvania, because our company email addresses are public, a letter from an advocacy organization in Pennsylvania asking us to, it was a 2-page letter, it was asking us to get in touch with our legislators over a recent change to a program we call Child Care Works, which is essentially a subsidy program for parents that are low income to allow them to work that, you know, essentially sends their kids to child care. And they're talking about how it's, the system doesn't work properly because it's a 2-tier system, and once the parents lose their jobs for 6 months, the kids get kicked out of the program, but if they can be reinstated in 3 months, then they can get their money back. And then we can actually do retroactive payments, and so we all, you know, we business folks are saying, okay, I won't make a paper airplane out of this thing. What I'll do is I'll call my executive director of the Early Learning Investment Commission, and they will put together a cogent and coherent response to these people because, you know, you folks deserve a response. But you don't ask the business folks to get involved in this stuff. So what would a more effective letter have been, or what would a more effective communication have been? It would have been, do you know how much the loss of this kind of funding does in terms of harm to you as a 100-person employer in the state? Do you know what it causes in terms of absenteeism, presenteeism? Do you know what it causes in terms of pilferage? Do you know what it causes in terms of health care costs? So when you start to talk that way, then it's bucks, right? And so that would have been a much more effective message, regardless of the routing that the message took. So that's just
an
example to answer the question.
Yeah, Kevin, you got one?
How can I top that? But I'll try. Yeah, I think the two most frightening words in the early childhood community when you're talking to a business person is when, as Phil mentioned, you start talking about blended funding. You guys all have blended funding and food allotments and the FDA, and it's like, I have been in this field for 33 years, and I glaze over when you start getting into it because you're so passionate. It's a second language to you. It really is. But again, keep it short and keep it concise. And the other thing is let people know what the needs are internally in a classroom. It's amazing to me. I talked about earlier when I was up front talking about social media and the new way of doing business. It's really pretty intriguing. One of the most successful organizations now to support teachers did not exist 5 years ago. And it's not a teachers union. It's not NEYC. It's not one of the typical groups. It's a group called Donors Choose. Donors Choose. DonorsChoose.org. Started by a math teacher in the Bronx 7 years ago because he couldn't get materials for his classroom. budgets were being slashed, budgets were being cut. So he said, well, I'm going to get online. I'll do online. So what I'll do is, I'm Kevin Carnes. I'm a kindergarten teacher in the Bronx, or I'm a kindergarten teacher in Chicago, wherever it might be, and I need a science corner. I want to teach my kids math. Or my kids really want to get into reading, but we have no library. So what he did is basically opened up a website, and I came along as Kevin Carnes, second grade teacher. I would love a $200 science corner or books, or I'd love to take my kids on a field trip to the museum, whatever it might be. We don't have it in our budget. Can you help us? And here's why, and here's who our kids are. And the teacher has to give a 2-paragraph explanation. And then I come along, say, well, I want to help somebody in my community. I type in my zip code, here's that school, and I can give $10, $15, $20, whatever, until it tops out. And then all of a sudden that teacher then gets that field trip museum, gets that science corner. So that is in really common language for the community to see what the needs are in schools. Currently they do K to 12. It was interesting because the cool part is, as a donor, you get actually some feedback. It's not like giving to the Red Cross and other great groups so you don't really know where the money's going. At the end, you get it back. You get a letter back, or a note back, or an email back from the kids. Thank you so much, Mr. Jones, for helping me with the science corner. And then it brings it down. And they have gotten companies to get involved in a huge way. Crate and Barrel. Crate and Barrel, if you buy $500 worth of materials from Crate and Barrel, they give you a $50 donor choose card that you can pick and choose whatever you want. And that really gets it out there. They did last year, starting 6 years ago with zero, they did $80 million last year in donations from companies. Google just gave them $10 million for STEM materials. So there's companies out there because they do it simple. And they do it in common English. And we did it, it was great. I did a donation, and I'll stop, but it's something to really look at, and things like that. We did something anonymously. We fulfilled some requests, and so we usually get a thank you note. Dear Mr. Jones, thank you for giving us a science corner. Thank you for doing this. We did it anonymously. And so I got a thank you letter from a school in Arkansas that we'd done some science stuff for, and it was, Dear Anonymous, what's your real name? And that was it. But it really brings it personal. And that is something which is really, I think, a great way to direct businesses to. What do you want to do? Go to Donors Choose or a like group, and you can see what the needs are.
Awesome examples. You know, I can't not speak to the issue of making the language simple. I'll tell you a little story. I was in Washington a good bit last week, and we were hearing about the new proposal. And I want to tell my good friends, my family members who live in the early childhood community. So we're in a pretty big room, and there's a battle. And the battle is about the words. And the words were pre-K for all. Well, all of the early childhood people were apoplectic. They were like apoplectic. You're not talking about the babies. What happened to the babies? And everybody who wasn't part of the inner circle was saying, we are so clueless. What are you talking about? And we said the folks, we're talking about everything that happens before kindergarten. How does that mean we've left out the babies? And of course, in our lexicon, what that means is pre-K's for 3 and 4, or just for 4. And therefore, you must have left out the babies. And everybody's all hysterical. At one point, sort of, I'm going like, wow. And somebody says, you know what? If we actually got over ourselves long enough to figure out, I mean, pre-K actually does mean to most people everything and anything that happens before you get to kindergarten. And so we could sort of all have pre-K instead of going, oh, but it's not the babies. It was a fascinating conversation, and I have to tell you, you guys have just confirmed 100% that nobody else knows what we're talking about, and that they don't understand the difference. And we so love the complexity of our universe, and we just love talking about how big the system is and how many components there are, and it doesn't make any sense, does it? No. Okay, so given that, If we're going to try to get simple and really straightforward, and we're talking about a variety of different, you all have given us some examples of the way businesses can be involved. So help connect a hook. You know, what's a good hook for us? It would seem to me that you might match the ask with the kind of company. Maybe? I mean, that would be relative. That would be marketing from the high school. Yeah. So help us talk to us about how that works.
Go ahead. I think for us it can show up in a couple of ways, but I think this notion of sort of sector-focused interest is really important. So where there is great interest in sort of the broad spectrum of issues around health, then the pharmaceutical industries, the healthcare companies, the insurance companies are likely the places where you may get real attention and where there may be a common language and understanding of the things that are relevant to their core competencies as a business and relevant to their interests. One of the things that we've done in our philanthropic priorities is frankly refine them so that they're more narrowly focused, and when you see them, it looks like it does not include early childhood education, and on the surface it doesn't. But the priorities are affordable housing, financial empowerment, and workforce readiness and economic development. So nowhere in there is the term education, but in the workforce readiness space is where the education portfolio will sit. But again, it still doesn't say 0 to 20 or K to 12. In fact, we're focused on 14 to 20 plus. So we had to help our people think about the fact that the critical element of early childhood education and early learning systems is quality, and the quality of the workforce associated with that sector is as critical as the programs and services and the costs associated with delivering it. So it is about sort of understanding what are the core capabilities of a company, what might be the things that are of greatest interest to them, and how do you align those interests against the broad range of issues and concerns and actions that you want to engage business in.
Awesome. Phil?
I think Kim's points are very well made. To elaborate on those, I think, you know, I had said before, you need to find a champion and take advantage of established momentum. All of you, I'm sure, in your communities have folks who have some interest, some curiosity, or already involved, engaged in some way in early childhood. They may not understand it very well, but they probably have a proclivity towards supporting, at least learning more about it and what it means for them and for their communities. So anybody that's community conscious, you know, there's a hook right there, especially if you can engage somebody who's already fairly well ensconced in the space, and someone who's already got an investment, either personal or through their company in the space, and finding out, learning from them, what it is that got them involved, what was the hook for them, and then to use that with their ilk in the community. I mean, that's the simplest way to do it. I think the other way to do it is to learn, if there's a complete void currently in your communities of people who are invested in the space, then another way to do it, since you're starting, you know, in a greenfield way, is to pick a very visible set of community leaders, maybe through the chamber, maybe through a service club, and offer to have a meeting with them, do a lunch speaking engagement, and talk to them as Kim and Kevin and Kim have both said, talk to them as if you are business people in the community. And so that means doing some homework on learning about their businesses and what drives them, what civic ventures they're already involved in, where they're contributing resources, time, money, and picking up on that. So that what you can do is you can provide an argument when they start to ask this question about, wow, I didn't realize that early childhood actually, yeah, the long-term return, that's a problem for me, but The short term, wow, it actually remediates special ed. It actually creates a better home life for these kids that can be measured through through talking to the local police department and finding that there's less crime. And so, you know, that's the kind of thing that you can do. A little research, finding out what's, you already have your arguments for what the evidence-based proof is, and then using what their interests are and what their business motivations are to talk that same language. In a sense, it all comes down to return on investment. That's what it really comes down to.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it really is a return on investment, and I think, again, not to beat a dead horse here, but you need to jump in the business silo, because you really are businesses, and I think sometimes we really don't think of ourselves as such, but that's hugely important. Another question I get a lot is, well, where do you start? There's a company down the street, a big company that you know, I've got a lot of their kids in my program, or their parents have their kids in my program. You want to start with the HR department. I found the most success in an HR department. An HR department, it's their job to take care of employees. I mean, that's where it starts. And oftentimes, if there's a program going on, getting employees involved in the community, which a lot of good, strong companies do that as part of their everyday business practice, it starts in the HR department. So that's really where you start, because I think a lot of people make the misassumption, well, I'm going to write a letter to that CEO, and I'm going to get some action here. And it just doesn't work like that usually, because there's lots of other things going on way at the upper stratosphere. But in the HR department, that's where these ideas bubble, and you can get involved in the community. And I use my example. I use my example of the Home Depot folks coming in and volunteering to help build our outdoor classroom. That came from their HR department. It didn't come from up here in the top of the ivory tower. Because that's the folks that are really getting actively engaged and getting their people actively engaged. And to Kim's point, a good example of that is the Kaiser Health Foundation, which is a huge health organization across the country. And they're getting actively involved in childhood obesity and getting into the preschool programs because they see it as a way of prevention, and this is the way to start in early childhood. And they're doing grants to programs throughout the West now to help alleviate that or get involved in that with resources and so forth. But HR departments are the hidden secret places to start. Don't tell them I told you.
Kim?
I guess I would also ask us to consider this question of how we engage the business community around the interests of communities that they are totally disconnected from. Okay, so the fact of the matter is that the HR department in the communities where there's a Rotary Club and Kiwanis and the employees work in that company is probably a likely set of, you know, success factors to get some engagement. I think the challenge is really getting the interests of the business community around high-need communities that they're not connected to, and really addressing this notion of quality and access for all communities, and how we fund that, who's responsible for it, how we advocate for it, and how do we bring an education to the business community about the criticality of toxic stress, the science of adversity, what the research says about what happens when kids are not developed, and that when they get to kindergarten and start behind, they stay behind, and what are the implications for our community and our country and our businesses. And I think that's part of the issue, right? Because we're talking about the communities that somewhat have the resources and the engagement and the interest. I think the real issue is how do we get their attention around those communities that are not engaged, that they don't go to, that they don't necessarily associate with, and frankly, you know, sort of think of it as being their problem.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, so time for questions from the floor. Okay, come on. Thank you both, for all of you, for that. I think we did have a conversation earlier, and it's certainly something we're working a lot on in North Carolina, around the conversation around equity, conversation around the responsibility of all of us to be sure that all of the children receive the highest quality service possible, and that their families can do the very best job that they really want to do. But we have to make it possible in some cases.
And
yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry, Ken.
No, I did. The other thing, real quick, is that when you have a bully pulpit of a large international company, you can really get people's attention. And that was just brought home to me recently when I was in Omaha for this Arbor Day thing. I visited the Buffett Foundation. They'd asked me to stop, and they're doing some wonderful things in early childhood education in really impacted areas around the country with their educare centers. And I was talking with their ed director, and she said the first thing we do is, and because they have a bully pulpit, which is important. When you're Warren Buffett, you can have a bully pulpit. We invite the state senators, the state legislators in to see our center in action, and then we invite Mutual of Omaha and some of the other folks to see us. They come into our neck of the woods, which is not the suburbs. It's the inner city, to address Kim's issue. So that's another way. That's just a recent one. So.
That's a great example of the philanthropist picking that target area of the more needy kids and trying to hold that up for other folks. But question.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I see two different issues. One is getting businesses to give us support for a specific project or program, which you gave us some wonderful ideas. What success or strategies do you have on getting some of the large chain employers who employ a lot of people at close to minimum wage, usually less than 20 hours a week, so they don't have to pay benefits, to be conscientious of the child care needs of their employees, like the Walmarts, the fast food places? How can we get them to maybe consider supporting child care options for their employees?
Well, I think, that's a tough one, but I think you've already got the pump primed, because a lot of those folks, as we've said, a lot of those folks do use, who knows how many, right? But subsidized care in some way, shape, or form. Now, it's also a great argument to educate employees, or opportunity to educate employees that don't use quality care, to demonstrate the advantages of using quality care. And there are plenty of studies out there, right? I mean, you know all the studies that demonstrate what quality means versus lack thereof. And so I actually think you've got a real opportunity through the HR department of those kinds of companies to present research that demonstrates the use of care, subsidized and subsidies that exist at various levels, and the evidence that comes from those kids being in a really great environment. And it's also, there are also a lot of, we're connected with, and I'd have to go to Josh to find out exactly what their name is, but a collaborative of early care centers. And, a lot of those care centers are setting up on-site centers for large enough employers. So it's another angle to explore. And I think once again, you have to pair it from a business point of view. You have to create a business case. And the business case demonstrates for those large employers, generally retailers, I think is what you were implying, that there is considerable evidence to demonstrate an investment in quality care, no matter what the format is, whether it's on-site or otherwise.
And it does pay off, and you're absolutely correct, because as I mentioned earlier when I was speaking earlier about a lot of folks don't realize, a lot of companies, big companies, don't realize the subsidized child care allows them to pay $9 an hour for their employees. I mean, I was really had my eyes open up. For the first time, I was asked to be at the NYC Leadership Forum in D.C. last month, and I actually went up on the Hill to advocate, and that was a real eye-opening experience. I'd never done that before. So I went up with a group of early childhood folks afterwards, and we had appointments with Senate offices and House offices. And I was in I'm from California, I was in Senator Dianne Feinstein's office in her foyer, and I was going to go in there to speak to some 14-year-old legislative aide. So, by the way, when you communicate with legislators, remember who you're communicating with. You're not communicating with the senator. You're communicating with a 23-year-old, really smart, usually, intern. And they like to be communicated with Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. Okay, so I mean, that's just a little point, a little side note. Don't get me going. But that was important. But the point being is, while I was in that waiting room, when I was in the waiting room waiting, I did a list. In fact, I jotted down, there were about 4 or 5 groups that came in. I was waiting for my appointment. And during that time, the National Convenience Store Operators team came in. The National Gas Pipeline Association came in and announced themselves for their appointment. The Firefighters Union, the Private Park Association, and the Kiwanis Club folks were in there to pitch their pitch. So I'm just saying, if we can get Walmart, which is, and I'm not picking on Walmart at all, they're a big company, but if Walmart realizes it's really important that we keep Head Start fully funded, we need to get our lobbyists in there to tell Diane, we need to vote for this. This is important. Not just because we're good guys, because it also helps us to keep our workforce in place. Thank you.
I do. Oh, I think there's one other question back there. I did want to mention to do with making the business case and also thinking about what's important to the person you're pitching to. When I knew Kevin in our first iteration back in the 80s, I worked with then Governor Bill Clinton in Arkansas, and the...
Hi, thank you. I work for a large Metropolitan United Way doing public policy, and we've done a lot of the things that you've mentioned as far as business engagement. What we struggle with is a balance between properly engaging you as business leaders and supporting you to be the champions we need you to be for public policy in the area of early childhood. So if you could give us some tips on how we best as advocates support you to be champions for early childhood public policy, that would help.
Phil, you start to talk about that by not mixing philanthropy.
Well, Stephanie asked me, and you probably saw on the agenda, that I was supposed to talk about policy. And you probably saw how I adroitly sidestepped talking about policy. Instead, I talked about engaging the business community. Starting in Pennsylvania, and I'll go on the record as well nationally, we as business people should not be talking about policy. We don't know policy, okay? We know that we're told that certain policies produce programs that work. But we're not going to support policy, because policy is a word that means a lot of different things. And I guess the way I would look at it is that the policy that business people want to support is the policy that best supports young children. All right? It's not policy with respect to certain approaches to funding, to providing care, to the politicism that always invades policy, because then we as business people get confused. It devolves into a partisan issue, because that's what policy does, right? It creates fences. So what we want to do is, because one, we're not experts like you, and we can't talk to individual policy, and two, because you want us to be as effective as possible, help us rise above policy. Don't ask us to support policy. Ask us to support a programmatic venture that includes several different aspects, okay? And it's okay to break down that universe of a programmatic venture into certain components, and ask us to help understand those things. But it's really less important for us to understand, in Pennsylvania, for instance, Child Care Works, Keystone Stars, the TEACH program, okay, Early Head Start. It's less important for us to understand that. It's more important for us to understand that that people like you, who have put those programs together into an integrated whole, work. And they work across a continuum to support families, kids, different ages, different venues, different income levels. And that's what's important, and that's what we should be talking to legislators about how the venture works, not about individual policies. Because then what you do is, if you ask us to get involved in supporting policies, we end up getting into the kind of example that I told you about before with the letter that I received. So we're not put in the best position to support early childhood when that happens. So I don't know that that's answering your question directly, but what I would say is that you have to have a cogent and coherent and very easily communicated set of things that work for young kids with some evidence behind them. You won't have evidence maybe behind all of them, but there's evidence behind them nationally, statewide, in the local community, and other people are saying great things about them, and you've built kind of you've built a wave of support for your approach, your broad approach, your integrative approach, and that's what we should be getting behind. If you want to call that a policy, that's fine.
Yeah, wow, that was I'm going to steal that too. And it likens to me the challenge we have in our company and in our foundation around supporting education reform. And, you know, how terribly polarizing that conversation can become. And so how do we enter into the reform movement and not advocate a specific policy or approach, but to agree that we need to do everything to change this system, and that if we can focus on the things that are going to change student outcomes, then that's the conversation and the set of activities that we need to be armed with how to advocate. I heard an expression that Ben Hecht, who runs the Living Cities organization, describe what's happening in regional economies and in cities, and he said that we are program rich but systems poor. And I would argue that that's sort of the paradox that we're in, even in this system, that there are programmatic things that are addressing the needs of the pre-K population, and yet what we're trying to influence is a system that will somehow address the needs of all families and all children in a way that gets at equity and quality and allows for all kids to succeed. And so that can quickly turn into a policy debate that we do want to stay away from. And in a lot of companies, for example, in our company, we have a government relations organization. So we're not going to lobby for early childhood education. Our lobbyists are going to lobby for the things that are relevant to financial services. I learned that the hard way. I was the champion. You know, I went to the government relations colleague, oh, can't you come to this meeting and talk about early childhood education and what's important? And they're not going to do it. So I think it's also knowing what a company will champion. Right. And understand how it aligns with their interests and core capabilities as a business, but also to be able to figure out how to address the larger systems in a way that gets at the outcomes for all kids. Kevin?
And sometimes you give them an appetizer, just a tiny appetizer that's non-controversial, a little cheese puff, and they like that cheese puff, and it leads to another and another and another. I've seen that. I'm on a council in Los Angeles called LAUP Business Advisory Panel. And that's pretty intriguing because that's a group of business from all over Boeing and a whole lot of other folks, 12 of us, that meet regularly and just talk about child care and child development programs in the LA area. And it's really been enlightening over the last 3 or 4 years. I'm pretty well versed in it, but there's a lot of folks that weren't. And to see the interest level, it's really pretty interesting. Universal Studios is on this panel. And by the second year, just talking about how do we honor, and to your point, not controversial, which is important, how do we honor quality early childhood educators? And Universal Studios, after a year and a half, they decided, their person that was representing them on the board decided, you know, let us host a Teacher of the Year for preschool programs at Universal Studios. And they put on this amazing thing, which honored quality early childhood teachers, 10 of them, and they've done it for the last 3 years now, and it's like a really first-class thing. And it was just so interesting. It's not really controversial, but they really put their money where their mouth was, and they put their publicity machine behind it, and it's all over town. The Teachers of the Year, they call it the Toy Award for Early Childhood Teacher of the Year. And again, that was started with a very small little appetizer. And once they saw the importance of the quality programs. So.
Great examples. Last question? Yes? Okay, 2. You're the last 2, guys, okay?
I'm from Michigan, and I really appreciate your comments on what to do with folks once you get them to the table, because we did a great job initially of bringing a lot of our business folks to the table. We told them we were great problem solvers, and then we didn't give them a lot of problems to do. And so the other issue that happened with that was, even though we knew not to inundate people with funding, because a lot of the people that we brought to the table were small business, and so they get inundated a lot in the community. And so we didn't inundate them, but everyone else at the table would get them after the meeting, and the YMCA and our United Way. And so we had to really work as a team to make sure that we did not do that. But one thing that came up was a lot of the business folks wanted to know why this initiative over something else, which is a really uncomfortable discussion to have. But my question to you is, do you need to hear that addressed as business people, or can we just simply make the case and let it be?
Great question, thank you.
So when I go in to see legislators, you often get that question. Well, Phil, I got a lot of people that say that, there's money needed in a lot of different areas. So what am I supposed to do? We've got limited funds. I mean, and it usually comes up in contrast to the rest of the educational pipeline. So K through 12, and then post-secondary. So. Because in Pennsylvania, obviously, K through 12 is public school and funding, and then there's considerable budget going towards assisting the post-secondary world as well. So my response is very simple. I've canned it. I said, I can't tell you what to do. That's obviously your realm, but I will tell you that the way that the money you spend on K through 12 and post-secondary education will only be worthwhile if you start spending the money before kindergarten. And that your return on investment on that spend is going to be a heck of a lot larger. And that you won't see it in your term, but in someone else's term, you'll actually see the amount of necessary spend in those later years go down because you made the investment earlier. I mean, it's, you can't make the decision. It's you have to be careful not to take on to yourself, the requirement that someone puts on you to answer that. It's not yours to answer. You simply make the argument.
Kevin or Kim?
Yeah, and the word's getting out, I think, a little bit too. It's interesting, just this last year, as states started to turn around and bottom out after this, 5-year run we've had with this recession, that Alabama was one of the first states in the South that came up with a budget surplus for the first time, $12 million. And that's a pretty red state, Alabama. And the governor of Alabama put all $12 million towards expansion of early childhood programs, not because he was a good guy, because he may be fabulous, I don't know him personally, but he said it was a business decision. If we're going to be a strong, vibrant state, we need to put this first bit of money we're getting back into early, because we need to start at the bottom, work our way up, and that's where the key is. So it's getting out there. I'm seeing it more and more across the country as I travel around. But that's a good example. Like all of a sudden, people are coming to the realization it didn't have to be beat over their heads, but this is a business decision. We want a future workforce. That's important now.
I usually supplement that by also saying, I say, show me what other entitlement program or other government-funded program can give you the evidence-based proof that you need that the funding for these other programs works as well as this. Because here, I can show you proof.
Kim, did you want to add anything? No? Great. Okay, last question. She's standing. These are great answers. Thank you all.
So this has been a great session, so thank you very much. And Kim, I think it was you that said earlier something to the effect of businesses want to know who owns the work. And I just found that really interesting. Like, what do we mean by that, I guess? Who, you know, with all the acronyms we use in Head Start and Type 1 child care centers and all the different things, I get that, and that's our language, but who owns the work? Who does own the work?
And I think what I was trying to convey is that it is a system that has so many different owners, right? It's the child welfare system, it's the Department of Education, it's Health and Human Services, it's whatever cities and municipalities and states that are sort of managing those systems. So that was my confusion around the language and around the complexity of the issues. That's what was behind that question.
Thanks. Well, thank you so much. I'll give each of you sort of the last word, any last word that you'd like to add. Any, what would you, is this group that is eager and passionate about the investment that the country must make in early education, what's your last piece of advice to them? Yes?
You're an incredibly important business, not a service.
Business, not a service. All right, Kevin. Phil.
The business community depends on folks like you to create the messaging and the compelling argument.
All right.
Keep that in mind.
And Kim?
Two things. I think that there is a holistic message that this sector can deliver that's both an economic message, it's a message of education, it's a message of allowing parents to go to work, it's a message of being an employer. There are so many elements that the sector provides in terms of connecting to the interests of the business community, and I think it's just a question of how do you get the attention and craft a message that most effectively will get the attention and investment that's needed. And my final comment to the person who asked the question about which issue is more important, my favorite expression is one that was coined from Frederick Douglass, who said it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men.
That's a great way to leave the afternoon. Thank you all for your patience, and thanks to our presenter.